Welcome to the final clue for our Winter 2023 Mystery Quilt. We have just a little bit of cutting before we can finish this quilt. From the dark fabric, cut 12 squares that are 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches. I have 4 layers here, so I only need to make 3 different cuts, 7.5 inch, 5 inch, and 2.5 inch to get my 12 squares. From the inner border fabric, cut 6 strips that are 2.5 inches by the width of fabric. From these strips, you will cut 4 rectangles, 2.5 by 10.5, and 20 rectangles, 2.5 by 8.5. Since there isn't a lot of fabric left over, I'm just going to cut 7 strips, and then I can have a spare strip in case I make a mistake. While I'm at the cutting table, I'm going to go ahead and work ahead and cut the binding fabric. You need to cut 7 strips that are 2.5 inches by the width of fabric. You will piece these together end to end to make continuous binding to go all the way around the quilt top. From the outer border fabric, you need to cut 7 strips that are 5 inches by the width of fabric. Make sure that your edge is straight after every few cuts. That way, when you make your 5-inch cuts, you don't end up with the dreaded V. And now it's time to sew. Let's solve this mystery. Make sure you use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. First, we need to find our clue number 2 bag and our clue number 5 bag. We are going to piece these 2 units together. The rectangle made from the secondary background fabric should be in the center. As I was putting this together, I kind of pictured my blue unit to be the roof of a house and the pink unit to be the door, so that kind of helped me make sure I was sewing it correctly. There should be 36 of these units. For these units, you want to press towards the rectangle. This unit will measure 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches. Now it's time to find the clue 1 bag and the clue 4 bag. Piece the units from clue number 1 onto the side of the units from clue number 4. There will also be 36 of this unit. They should measure 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches when pressed. Press these units towards the background rectangle. Now it's time to assemble the block. We're going to start by putting the house units, or what I call the house units, on opposite sides of the 9-patch unit. These seams should nest together, so you might not even need to pin. We are making 9 of this center row. If you wanted to, you could go to the ironing board right now and press towards the 9-patch unit, but I'm going to sew the other side on first and do both of them at the same time when I get to the ironing board. To help convince my seams to lay a little bit flatter, I'm going to use some spray starch on the 2 seams that I just made. I'm going to press towards the 9-patch unit. Now we're going to make the top and bottom rows for the block. These I did pin because they were a little harder and some of the seams did not nest. So to make sure that I had seams that were matching up, I would pin right on the seam line. After a little trial and error, I did discover that putting the pins right on the thick seams instead of in the seam line helped make sure that they didn't shift as much, and I got much better results. We are making 18 of this row. A visual that helped me make sure I was pinning them correctly was I checked to make sure background fabric was next to background fabric and secondary background fabric was pinned to secondary background fabric. Once you have the first corner on all the house pieces, then add the other corner. I highly recommend you make sure to pin for these sections. It makes everything go together much nicer. While it does take a little time, the result is worth it. Press these seams away from the center unit. Piece the outer rows to opposite sides of the center row. The center will look like a checkerboard and it will be surrounded by the secondary background fabric. Some of these seams will nest together, others will not, so pinning is a must. I'm not a big fan of pinning either. I know it takes time, but sometimes it helps to get the best result. As I'm piecing these units together, I try to sew as close to the pins as I possibly can without running over them. Once you've sewn all these together, you want to take it to the ironing board and press towards the center row. Now it's time to add the other side so the block is complete. When these are finished, they will measure 18.5 inches by 18.5 inches. As I was adding these on, sometimes I would not put the first one that was on top of the pile on. I would get one underneath so that there weren't so many pieces that were exactly the same right next to each other. Press this seam toward the center row. Piece 2 of the sashing units from clue number 5 between 3 of the blocks and press towards the sashing fabric. Make 3 rows. Piece the 2.5-inch squares cut from jelly roll strips in clue number 5 between 3 sashing units and 1 on each end. Make 2 of the sashing rows. Now it's time to work on the inner border. Using 8 of the dark squares and 16 of the 2.5-inch by 8.5-inch inner border rectangles, piece the dark squares between the rectangles and press towards the dark square. You will make 8 of these units. They will measure 2.5 inches by 18.5 inches. Once pressed, use 6 of these to piece onto each end of the block rows. Press towards the inner border fabric. Piece the 2 sashing rows between the block rows and press towards the sashing rows. Piece a jelly roll square onto each end of the 2 remaining inner border units and press towards the inner border fabric. Piece dark squares between 2.5 inch by 8.5 inch and 2.5 inch by 10.5 inch inner border rectangles and press towards the dark square. You will make 4 of these units. Once pressed, piece these to each end of the 2 inner border units with the jelly roll squares on each end and press. The 10.5 inch rectangles need to be on the ends of this unit. Piece the inner border row to opposite sides of the quilt top. Press towards the inner border fabric. Piece your border strips end to end and trim to 1/4 inch and press the seams open. Measure the quilt top and cut 2 border rectangles to that length. Piece the outer border to opposite sides of the quilt top and press towards the outer border. Pinning will help make sure that you don't stretch the outer border as you sew it on. Measure again the long way and cut 2 outer border rectangles to that length and piece to the quilt top, and you're done. Once the border is on, it's time to layer with batting and backing and quilt as desired and bind. For my bright colorway, I decided to quilt it with this large loop design in a white thread. For my floral version, I used a variegated thread that had soft colors, and then I just did a stipple design, which is kind of an all-over meander. And here is the finished quilt. Got the binding on it. I've got it all quilted. I think it turned out fabulous. I really like how the pinks pop right off that background. And the border just finishes it off nicely. I'm going to get a little bit close in here so you can see a few little details there. So the 18.5-inch blocks with all the sashing, and then the inner border all the way around it. I love the green on there. I think that looks great. All right, next quilt. And here is the floral version. Now, if you'll notice, I added a little bit of fabric. I just pieced the leftover strips and then added a kind of piano key border to the top and the bottom of the quilt. I decided to make this one just a little bit longer. I also made the border a little bit wider than the 5 inches that is on the other one. Just wanted it slightly bigger than the other one. And I love, love, love these fabrics. This border piece is so pretty. And I like the dark fabric that I used for the blocks. Just really pops off that really soft grunge fabric. So that is the floral version. Hope you like it as much as I do. And surprise, I have one more version to show you. You didn't know you were seeing this one. But next is our Santa version. And here is our Christmas version. We kind of built the whole thing around the border print. So we picked that first and then picked all the other pieces off of that. And instead of having a pieced inner border, we just went with one fabric. So it's got this fun little stripe that we used for the inner border and the binding. So instead of doing a pieced inner border, we did just a plain one. But the red in there really pops. We used a dark green. We used about 10 different red stripes. Well, 20 strips, but we've got them all in there. And that's the fun one you didn't know you were going to see. So if you don't want to do the piece border, you could always just pick one fabric and do an inner border out of one fabric. So hope you enjoyed the mystery. We'll start planning the next one, and hopefully we will see you there. Thanks for watching, and happy quilting! For a downloadable version of this pattern, you can find it in the Files section of our Facebook group called The Quilted Forest Friends. Or you can push pause and take notes, or take screenshots and print it at home. Thanks for watching.